Good morning. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of Chasing Quicksilver. Chasing Quicksilver is my attempt at reconciling the challenges that exist between science and soul and trying to build a bridge in that area. The farther we go in our scientific exploration and understanding today, the closer we're getting to really ancient ideas about the nature of spirit, the nature of the universe, and the nature of ourselves. And what I see out there in the world is a whole bunch of different sets of languages, whether that's English, Mandarin, Hindi, whatever language you happen to speak, and their versions of describing the nature of existence, the soul, and God. But we also have different sets of languages that I've explored over the years that I call symbolic sets. And in a previous video released yesterday, I talked about my personal bio, my personal history, somewhat reluctantly. But I also mentioned some of the things that I have studied over the years in terms of exploring those symbolic sets and understandings, sort of packaged understandings of the world. And we think in terms of, because we had a Canadian academic, a very famous guy in the 1960s by the name of Marshall McLuhan. And McLuhan is famous for a couple things. He coined the term the global village, which is a fairly ubiquitous term that we have. The electronic age is something he coined. He said a really cool thing about school that I sticks in my mind. Increasingly, school is becoming a place of detention rather than a place of attention. And he talked about the Gutenberg Revolution, and he was a professor of media studies at the University of Toronto. And his probably most famous expression was, the medium is the message. And the medium is the methodology of transmitting information. And the medium shapes our perception of the universe and the world more substantially than the message does in most cases. And now what he meant by that, as far as I can understand and tell, is that we were, let's go back like 2,700 years, 2,500 years, Hellenistic Greece. We were moving away from full auditory transmission of culture, knowledge, and magic and medicine, philosophy. Mouth to ear, generation to generation, into writing down. We'd invented the phonetic alphabet, and we began to have the capacity to write things down. And the Greeks became concerned because we were externalizing our memories onto paper. And as a consequence of that, they felt that like we were surrendering our capacity to use our minds. And this hit another stage when we invented the printing press and we had the Gutenberg Bible. McLuhan wrote a book called the Gutenberg Galaxy. In any case, he felt like, and he argued that the invention of the printing press and the wide distribution of written knowledge and our capacity to print on paper changed the medium by which we consumed information. And that radically transformed technology, society, how we operate. We can think a little bit of some of the successive changes in medium, the invention of the telegraph, the capacity to communicate quickly or instantaneously across distance, the invention of the radio, the invention of the telephone, the invention of the television, and eventually the internet. Each of these mediums successively changing our minds in how we process information. Now, we tend to think of, a structure of information, or we're going to learn about a symbolic set or a set of ideas from a book. And that book usually has a spine, it has consecutive pages, and consecutive ideas. But one of my favorite symbolic sets, one of my favorite mediums for contemplating and exploring wisdom and spiritual understanding is the tarot. And the tarot is a book of leaves, Not tea leaves. This is This is the Radiant Wise Tarot. It's a reproduction of the Rider-Waite Tarot, if you're familiar with tarot. This is a book of leaves, and each of the leaves, there's 78 of them, tells two stories. It tells a story with the card upright. This is the Hermit, the number 9 of the Major Arcana. And it tells an invert story. Or it, as a single leaf, it represents the archetype of the Hermit, and all of the meaning that entails. And tarot as a book of leaves can be shuffled. So it's not sequential. It's holistic. It's organic. And it was a way, as far as I can tell, to be something in between the printed book, between oral tradition, the printed book, and some other medium, but it allowed in its structure the easy memorization of a large quantity of information, as well as the capacity to organize and store ideas and information within our minds, within our psyches, in a methodical, strategic way that dates right back into structures of oral tradition and storytelling that, we go back thousands and tens of thousands of years. Humans have always been symbolic creatures and always been storytellers, and tarot to me is a hybrid of the written tradition and the oral tradition that represents itself in glyphs and pictographs that have meaning to them. Lots and lots of people, the vast majority of people, come to tarot because they're mystified and enchanted and captivated by the idea of divination and of calling down spirits and the randomness of a tarot reading. Can we tell the future? Right, and the typical frames for questions are money, love, and happiness. Like, am I going to get the job that I want? Am I going to meet the person? Is my relationship going to remain stable? Am I going to be with this person forever? And happiness. How am I going to find happiness? How am I going to find joy in my life? And tarot can be a good mirror for examining some of those questions, but the answers always come from within. And tarot is just a facilitation tool. In my personal opinion, while I do turn cards for people occasionally, like birthday cards and Christmas cards and things like that, I don't read tarot or use any other tool specifically to divine the future. I believe that there's far more power in tarot than something so glib and callous as, like, tell me if my love life is going to get better. It has profound spiritual, archetypal understandings and representations within it. And if you study tarot, and you study tarot over a period of time, I'm now almost 25 years in the study, it builds upon itself. Knowledge compounds. And I learn more and more about the archetypes of tarot every single day. At a certain point, I began to think in terms of tarot. Now, what I mean by that is, so in the business world, I spent 20 years in finance and in financial advisory. And in the corporate and business world, we come upon these personality type inventories and communications trainings, sales trainings. And some of the sales trainings that I've had over the year have to do with how different people perceive information and how different people represent information and communicate in different ways. So one of the classic ones, or one of the really common ones that I talked about in my tarot and personality type videos, is the DISC profile. DISC stands for dominance, influence, supportiveness, and conscientiousness, DISC. It corresponds to fire, air, water, earth. It's really transparent that this classical model of the 4 elements, or the 4 humors, sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholic, correspond to this 4-quadrant methodology or model that's used in modern business, the DISC profile. And there's others like it, the Colby inventory, the True Colors model, Myers-Briggs, as I mentioned, is a 4 spectrum as opposed to a 4 quadrant model, but they all kind of fit that same mold. Tarot has 4 elements in it: earth, water, fire, and air. They're the same cards. Those 4 suits are the same cards that we based modern playing cards on. So hearts, clubs, spades, and diamonds. And they reflect those personality types. And so as I got to understand tarot, because I was so familiar with it and studied it for so long, as soon as people started training, or I started encountering training and messaging around these 4 quadrant personality type inventories, well, it made a lot more sense to me actually to think in terms of tarot and classical elements than these basically rebranded personality type inventories and models of personality. Those 4 quadrants, by the way, are the roots of alchemy, which dates back. We get really significant Hermetic texts in the mid. I want to say 3rd century, so 250-ish AD, with the Asclepius, and those elemental influences were conveyed from mouth to ear over generations and generations in the exploration of alchemy, and many of us understand alchemy. At least I learned in chemistry class that alchemy was the idea of trying to change lead into gold, which is actually a bullshit representation of what alchemy is. It's so culturally inappropriate and distorted that in any case, changing lead into gold means transforming your life. It means getting rid of and overcoming your shit and figuring out how to find peace in your life and how to find your connection to your own soul and how to be grounded in your own integrity. And that magic, that medicine is what allows us to become individual human beings and individuated human beings. So this is a really big overview of tarot. There are stories in here that date back to Hellenistic Greece and Plato, and the story of the chariot. There are other really obvious archetypes that are universal, like mom and dad. I don't know if you may be familiar with this, but I studied linguistics. Have been curious about lots and lots of things. I've been curious about the origins of language, and our alphabet and our capacity to communicate. The 22 cards of the major arcana of the tarot have been associated with the 22 letters of the Hebrew or Phoenician alphabet, which is even older. Phoenician alphabet is where we get the word phonetics, and phonemes, which are sound units of communication. So letters became associated with a sound instead of as a glyph. So in a hieroglyph, the pictoglyph tells a story in essence and represents a word. But in the Phoenician alphabet, the individual letters represented a sound. A, B, C, D, etc., etc. And the 22 cards of the major arcana have been associated with these original 22 phonemes of the Phoenician alphabet, which are actually based on ancient symbols. So in biblical Christian context, Yahweh has said, I think it was Moses who, with the burning bush, said, who are you? What are you? And he said, I am that I am. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. And in society, as we were developing the alphabet, the letters of the alphabet each responded to a sound, but they each had a set of mythological and mystical meanings associated with them. So this, the graphic I chose for my book is actually the Aleph. It's the A of the Phoenician alphabet. It looks like a bull's head with horns, actually, if you look at it, and it's superimposed upon the moon. And that is a card that represents beginnings. In tarot, it's the Fool, but it is birth, it's conception, it's dawn of a new day, it's It's March 21st, the beginning of the solar year. And the astrological year, it represents a sound, and the way that the sound is created is about manifesting into reality. And maybe someday I'll do a video on exactly what that means, but each of those 22 letters had a set of magical properties associated with them, and they served as mnemonic or memory pegs for telling stories and giving explanations for the universe that we lived in. So if we're talking about Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet that represents creation, or the Fool, it's conception and birth. And so we would have had stories about, how do seeds grow, and how do women, gestate children, and how are children conceived, and how are children born, and what are all the beginnings that we encounter. And so tarot contains the ancient structure and framework for all of these archetypal stories about, beginnings and obstacles and transformations and divisions and ceilings, and it's a rich study. And out of all the things that I have studied, which include Kabbalah, I am the heir to a lineage of astrology. I may be pushing that a little bit, but I did study with an astrologer who had studied with another astrologer, and I inherited his library of books on astrology and astrological tools when he passed a number of years ago. So I've studied analytical and symbolic astrology, as well as numerology and a whole suite of other Western occult systems of language or linguistic sets. So the tarot is a language. Kabbalah is a language of symbols. Astrology is a language of symbols. That original set of Phoenician alphabets is a contiguous, coherent set of symbols. I am the Alpha and the Omega. It is an attempt by a culture in a period of time to explain the fullness of the universe itself. That's my fascination with tarot. All of this boils down to questions about the nature of the soul. Who am I? And how can I transform lead into gold? What is the nature of alchemy itself? And is there such a thing as the Philosopher's Stone and the Lapis Philosophorum, or the Elixir of Life, or the Holy Grail? Do those things really exist? And if they do really exist, or if they exist in symbol, what's the nature of that symbol? And how can we tap into it to transform our lives into something more meaningful, more powerful, and more grounded for us in our own beings? And as far as I can tell, that's the best that we can get at in terms of the meaning of life. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of Chasing Quicksilver. It's an exploration, an attempt to merge the languages of science and soul. You can get a free audio preview of my book, the first couple of chapters, as a matter of fact, at www.chasingquicksilver.com.